everyone and welcome back to my channel. I'm Kirsty and in today's video I'm going to be doing another hair tutorial, but this time I'm going to be focusing on drawing plaits and I'm going to be showing you a demonstration of how I just drew that hairstyle. But first I'm going to be talking a bit about the structure of a plait and how it works. So a plait is made up of 3 strands of hair and they're all interlaced into each other, and so I'm starting off by showing you a simple method for how to draw the outline of a plait. So if you're trying to make your work look realistic, then I always recommend using a reference photo, even if it is to just look at the structure of the plait, because it's very hard to draw things realistically if you're just trying to do it from imagination, and most of the time it's not going to look very realistic if you're just drawing from imagination. There's no shame in using a reference photo. It's actually really good. It will make your work a lot better in a much shorter time period than if you're just trying to draw everything from memory. So as you can see, when I'm drawing this plait, I'm doing the individual little shapes at a time, and they're all very similar shapes, but they're just going in the different directions, and it's a very repetitive pattern that you're drawing with plaits. So make sure that you look at your reference photo and identify that pattern, and once you've done a few, it becomes very easy to notice where you've got to do the next segment of the plait. So when it comes to doing the outline sketch of the plait, I do recommend using a very light pencil so that if you get it wrong, then you can easily erase it without damaging the paper. So make sure you do it really lightly, and also make sure that you're looking at your reference photo and really study how the plait works and how those 3 strands interlace into each other. It's really useful to identify the 3 strands and follow them all the way through the whole plait. Okay, so now I'm going to talk you guys through how I drew the French braid and the plait as well. So I'm starting off with charcoal pencils, and I'm using the General's brand charcoal pencils. And the pencils that I'm using is the extra hard one. I'm using the HB as well, and also a 4B. And the 4B is the softest grade of all the charcoal, which means that it blends really easily and it creates a bit more powder, which means that when I'm blending, I'm going to be using a brush, and so it's a lot easier to blend the softer pencils. So the hair I'm going to be drawing today is going to be done using charcoal, but I've also done a video recently which is my do's and don'ts for drawing hair, and in that video I'm using graphite to draw hair. So if you're using graphite and if you also want to know more tips to draw hair, then make sure you check out that video, and I will link a card up above so you can just click on that and go straight to it. So I'm starting off by using the HB pencil, and I'm using this to block in the direction of the clumps of hair. As you can see, I'm not drawing in every individual strand of hair, I'm just blocking in the direction of all the main clumps of hair. And it's really important that you do this to identify the flow of the hair and also the individual clumps that you're going to need to render later on. And also you can see that when I'm doing my strokes, I'm doing them in lines, and they're not all uniform, they're just following the direction that the hair is going in. It's really important to do your strokes with the direction of the hair rather than all in one direction, otherwise it would look really odd and it won't look realistic. So once I've done that, I'm going to go in with this fluffy brush, and it doesn't really matter what brush you use to blend, I just used one that I had to hand and was quite soft. And I'm using this to blend out the charcoal. And as you can see, again, when I'm using that brush, I'm using it on the individual clumps, and I'm just going in the direction that those clumps are going in. I'm not trying to blend the whole thing all in one go and go over the whole patch. I want to do it in individual sections so that I can really get it looking soft, and I also get the direction correct as well. So I'm just going to continue to do that, and I'm taking my time, I'm not rushing it, and I'm just making sure that it looks really soft, and then I'm going to build up some more layers over the top. And also when you do blend with this fluffy brush, it softens everything out a bit so those lines aren't as harsh, but you can still see the general direction, so you still know where the individual clumps are, and then you can go and build on them. So now I'm going in with that extra hard pencil, and because it's extra hard, it means that you can get a finer point on it and do even more detail work. So I'm using that to now render some of the clumps a bit more, and I'm just using it to add in some more shadow, and I'm integrating those shadows and those harsh lines I did earlier into the highlights as well. And as you can see, the whole of the top half of the hair now has a tone to it. So there isn't any bits of the hairstyle that are just completely white and haven't got any charcoal. But that means that we've still got to lift up some highlights later on, because this will help it pop a bit more. So I'm just now going to go through all of the hair and add in these shadows. And again, I'm just looking at the reference photo and I'm looking where the shadows are. It will be very different with different types of reference photos. So just make sure you're identifying the shadows and the highlights, and do the shadows with this pencil and leave the highlights without any charcoal on, so it's easier to erase those parts later. Okay, so again, once I've done that, I'm going back in with that fluffy brush and I'm just using that to again blend everything out and soften it up a bit more. And now I'm going to go in with the 4B soft charcoal pencil, and this is really dark, so the softer the pencils are, the darker they are. So this is where I'm adding the really intense shadows. And also, because it's a softer charcoal pencil, it releases more of that powder so that you can blend it a bit more as well, which also helps to soften things out a bit more. So as you can see with plaits, the main shadows tend to be very much in the center line of the plait. If you look at all of the individual segments, you'll see that it tends to be that the shadows are on the inner and outside corners of each of the segment, and then as you go towards the middle, it's more of a highlighted region. And this is true for all of the segments really. It will tend to have a shadow either side of the segment, and then as you go towards the middle, it will be more highlighted. But you need to make sure that you don't just have harsh shadows and highlighted areas. It needs to integrate very smoothly into each other. So now I'm going in and adding those highlights, and as I just said, the highlights tend to be in the center of each of the segments. And I'm just adding these highlights with the eraser, and I'm using a cheap eraser just to show that you don't need really expensive materials to do a good job. So I'm just using that eraser, and I chopped a bit off the side with the crafting knife to get more of a sharp point so it's easier to get detail work. And now I'm just using that to pull out some highlights, and I'm looking at the reference photo for where the highlights are, and it tends to be quite a lot in the center of each of those segments, but there also tends to be some other highlighted areas, for example where this girl had highlights in her hair. And now, so you don't want all of those highlights to be as harsh as they are, so I'm using this fluffy brush just to soften some out, because I'll add a bit more powder to those highlighted areas, which will tone them down a bit. But then you do want some extremely highlighted areas to add a bit of contrast, so I'll go back in with the eraser to pull up some more additional highlights. And this helps to give a good variety into your highlights and shadows, and it also means that you get a lot of depth into your hairstyle as well. So now you can use your normal eraser or your kneaded eraser to help pull up some additional highlights. So now moving on to the bottom half of the hair, and this is mainly the plait that I'm drawing now. And so I'm drawing each segment in at a time, and I'm using the HB pencil again to block in the shadows. And as you can see, most of the shadows are on either side of that segment, and I'm also leaving a highlighted area towards the middle. And also where the segments interlock with each other, there tends to be a bit more shadow as well, especially down the center line of the plait. So I'm just blocking all that in, and then I'm going in with the fluffy brush and I'm just blending all the charcoal out. And then I'm going back in with that extra hard General's charcoal pencil, and I'm just going to use that to add in more detail before I blend that out again. One thing that I really like about using charcoal is the fact that you don't get any shine, which is really nice, especially when you're doing realism, because sometimes the shine can deflect from the realistic look. And also, especially when you have really dark areas, the darker the graphite pencil you use, the more shine you get. So that's why I really love using charcoal. And also it allows you to get even darker values, which I think is really nice for getting a really high contrast. I also like the way it blends with this brush, and it also just seems a lot easier to get a smoother coverage. And so now I'm just going back in with the eraser to add in even more highlights. Okay, so one thing that's going to make your hairstyle and your plait look really realistic is if you add some flyaway hairs, and that's what I'm going to do now. But instead of using a charcoal pencil, which is quite dark, I'm using a graphite pencil, and I'm using the grade B for this, and I'm just using this to add in some light flyaway hairs. Because the individual hairs will be lighter and you don't want them to be really dark, you just want some subtle flyaway hairs, so I'm just creating them to break up the individual clumps of hair and just to make it look a bit more realistic. Another thing you can do is take your eraser again and use that to add some flyaway hairs over the top of the hair. So then I'm just going around the plait and I'm adding some flyaway hairs as well. And that's basically it for this tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed it and learned some new tips and techniques. If you're new to my channel and you enjoyed this tutorial, make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss out on future tutorial videos. Thank you guys so much for watching. Remember, if you enjoyed doing this hair and you want to see how I do it with graphite, make sure you head over to my do's and don'ts video for drawing hair, where I'll show you how to do this but with graphite. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!